You're someone who feels like they just can never relax, like your neck is always tight, or maybe your shoulders are always up by your ears, or your back just feels tense, you're going to want to listen to this. I'm going to tell you why you're experiencing this and that there's many more levels to what you're experiencing than you may realize. I'm also going to tell you why stretching will not work for releasing that tension, and also tell you what you can do to improve your ability to relax muscles and feel like you're not a constant ball of nerves within your body. So if you feel like you're always tight, a natural reaction would be to stretch it. And that's what happens a lot of times. You feel like your muscles are tight, they're shortened, and the natural reaction would be to lengthen them or stretch them. That seems to make sense. And that's what happens a lot of times. And for some situations, that does make sense. There are times that stretching is beneficial. But if you're someone who experiences chronic tension, where it's going on for long periods of time, it doesn't seem to ever release, then that's when you need to dig a little bit deeper and figure out what's actually happening that I can work on to improve, to create a systematic relaxation of the muscles. So let's first talk about what muscles are. So muscles are structures that just respond to what the brain tells them to do. So if the brain says to contract, they contract. If the brain tells them to relax, they relax. If the brain tells them to contract for a long duration with a high intensity, that's what they do. So they just follow the order of what the brain is telling them to do. And so if signals are being sent by the brain and the nervous system to keep a contraction going, then that's essentially what will happen. And so what we see is that with patterns of behavior, so if you're someone who works at a desk, you may be on the keyboard kind of hunched over all the time, your neck is forward. And in the beginning, you're able to correct that, no big deal. But when you engage in those patterns of behavior for a long period of time, your brain becomes less sensitive to the positioning that you're engaging in. So this is called sensory motor amnesia, where your brain actually does not recognize that that's not where it should be because it's become the new normal. And so what happens is that there become tensioning patterns. So again, for the example of someone who has a desk job and is always kind of forward, you may get patterns where there's tension within your chest. So you get more of a rounded shoulders. There becomes a pattern of tension within your neck muscles. So they go forward, and maybe there's a lengthening in the neck muscles in the back. So now your posturing becomes more forward, and you don't even recognize that you're doing that because the sensitivity of your positioning has become dulled down because of the length of that positioning, length of time you've maintained that positioning. And so that is where that amnesia part comes in, where the sensory ability to figure out where you are the muscles relaxed, are they tensed, becomes less sensitive, and the brain actually doesn't have as much of a control over what's going on. So that's where we get those chronic contraction patterns of muscles and have difficulty actually relaxing the muscles. Additionally, what also happens is that when you have long periods of tension, so maybe you're at the computer and you're stressed out by something that you're typing or something you read, and you just happen to hike up your shoulders because that's a tense position. Or maybe you're driving and you just notice your shoulders are always hiked up and your neck is tense because it's a stressful situation, and you're holding that tension for a long period of time. Your body becomes accustomed to holding that tension. And unless it starts to unlearn those patterns, it becomes less sensitive to the tension that's actually being held in the muscle. So what happens when you rely on stretching alone is that in your nervous system, your brain, they're sending signals essentially to the muscle that to keep firing, to keep controlling the muscle to tense up. But when you are stretching it, you're externally applying a stimulus to lengthen that muscle. But it goes right back to its default pattern of being tightened because that's what the system is telling it to do. And it doesn't even recognize it's doing it because it's happening in the background. It's not consciously or voluntarily happening. It is at a lower level of your brain where it becomes automatic. And our systems are designed to be efficient. So what used to be maybe voluntary, or you recognize that you're doing it. Maybe you, at first you knew you're hiking your shoulders. Now you don't even recognize you're doing it because it's been put in the back burner. It's been put into like the subconscious mind essentially of your body, and that this is just what it knows. This is what it does. And it doesn't have to think about it. It just goes to its default pattern. So when you apply stretching to something that's in a default pattern of tension and contraction, it doesn't leave you with any long-lasting results. And that's why with chronic tension and contraction of the muscles, they actually have to learn how to relax again. So it's a teaching pattern at the brain and nervous system level that is going to give you long-lasting results, not applying an external stimulus of stretching. You may notice relief short term, but it's most likely going to go right back to the default pattern of contraction and tightening. So you can almost compare a muscle to like a car. So if your car is just idling, the engine's kind of just in a relaxation mode. It's just kind of keeping things running. It's just there. It's not really burning a lot of gas. It's pretty stationary. But muscles that are constantly contracting without even that cortical signaling to do it are essentially running an idle in third gear. So you can imagine if you're running an idle, but it's actually running third gear, you're blowing through gas, you're tensed up, the motor is working a lot harder than it needs to be. And that's when you see that there becomes patterns of fatigue, patterns of weakness, again, chronic tension where there's more energy burn to maintain that. So fatigue can actually set in with that as well, overall fatigue. So there's a lot of things that happen when the muscles can't actually relax because they're working a lot harder than they should be to just keep you stationary. So what happens in a lot of cases is that there's actually a neuromuscular dysfunction in that there is tightening of the muscles and contraction of the muscles when there should be relaxation. And it's essentially your body is almost like working against itself. It doesn't recognize when it needs to relax a muscle or when it needs to tighten a muscle. So you could think about if I was going to lift this coffee mug up, I'm going to use my bicep to lift that mug up. And my tricep, the muscle in the back of my arm, should relax to allow proper lengthening to actually bring this mug up to my mouth. So what happens with a state of, a default state of tension is that maybe my triceps don't fully relax and they're tensing while I'm trying to contract my bicep to bring the coffee mug up. So now I'm essentially working against myself. And what happens is it limits your ability to have smooth movements. It limits your ability to move fully through your range of motion. So you start getting shortening, patterning of shortening and postural defects, or maybe shortening of the muscles in the legs, the arms, the neck, wherever it is that it's occurring. And there becomes a whole dysfunction of movement because of this subcortical tension that's happening at the nervous system level. You can almost think about this when you learn to ride a bicycle. When you were a kid, or if you learned as an adult, whenever you learn to ride a bicycle, it took a lot of cognitive processing to figure out how to move and to do that well. And it didn't come naturally. You had to figure out how to balance, how to pedal while you were balancing on the bike. There was a lot of processing that had to happen in the brain so that you could stay on the bike and not fall off of it. But eventually, as you started to get used to riding the bike, it became very easy. And there's even a saying, it's like riding a bike, So you don't have to think about it. It's just you hop on the bike and you ride the bike. And that's all goes to the lower brain, where it just is, this is what I do. And you don't have to think about every little thing like, okay, pedal left, pedal right, keep it balanced. Those things are not in your conscious awareness anymore. And that's exactly what happens when you have chronic tension, and that these patterns of behavior have become below your upper brain. So your subconscious and your lower brain are just running them on autopilot. You don't have to think about sitting in a chair. You don't have to think about typing in a computer. It's just that your body is doing that and it doesn't even think about it. So unless you bring conscious awareness to what your muscles are doing at that time, it will continue to run the default program that has chronically been put into place for it to have extra contraction or stronger contraction or difficulty in relaxing the muscles. And that's the problem. So whatever has become a learned behavior for your muscles will continue until you bring conscious awareness to it to change that pattern. So you may say, okay, well, how do I know if that's what's happening? And one thing you can do is put yourself through a little test. So a lot of times when there is sensory motor amnesia that is present, your movements may be choppy, kind of glitchy, twitchy. They're not smooth. So smooth movements are an indication that everything is working in a way that your nervous system is dictating to the muscles to move appropriately. When it's twitchy, there's going to be more of a disconnect where it's kind of figuring out how to do that and how to coordinate that. Because again, with sensory motor amnesia, coordination is going to be one of those things that suffers. So one thing you can do is you can turn your head to the left and then also keep your eyes to the left while you do this. Raise your right shoulder up towards your ear with your arms hanging out the side. And then as slowly as you can, try to lower your shoulder down and just notice how your muscle is reacting. So are you able to do this slowly and smoothly, or do you feel like you're it's choppy, like it's going down in little segments and it's not very smooth? That's going to give you a better indication of if this is what's happening, if it's creating some kind of tension response that's happening within your muscle. And that, again, you can do that on your right side with the shoulders up and then slowly lower, and then switch sides, go to your left side and then do the same thing, raising your shoulder up to your ear and then slowly lowering it. So when you're doing this, you should do it within a pain-free range. You shouldn't be experiencing pain through that because, again, that can also impact your movement patterns. So you want to decrease the range of motion that you do it within and just only go within a range that is tolerable for you. But you do want to recognize how is your muscle responding and go as slowly as you can, because that's what allows your brain to actually process that and be aware of what's happening at the muscular level. So you might be listening to this and saying, okay, I'm experiencing that. I noticed that I do have constant tension, but what do I do about it? If stretching is not the route to decrease this tension, then how do I actually get to a place where I can experience relaxation? And that's where using the nervous system as a tool to serve your body and allow for relaxation is going to be key. So what does that look like? So the big thing is going through movement patterns that are slow and conscious. And slow is going to be the key thing here, along with being aware of how you're moving. So in the case of your upper traps or your shoulder muscles, if you were to raise your muscles up, tighten them and hold them while taking a deep inhale, hold for a moment, and then as you relax and slowly exhale, you're going to slowly lower the shoulders and just bring your awareness to them. How are they moving? Are there any changes from left to right side? Any differences between those sides? Does one seem to kind of glide down better than another? Does one seem to kind of stay up? Are there any asymmetries there? And in a non-judgmental way, don't judge how you're moving, just be aware of it. Okay, I noticed that maybe my left is a little more hiked than my right. All right, let me do it again. And going through those motions and just bringing awareness to it brings on that upper brain and the more cortical and conscious awareness to the movement patterns will help your body to relearn better movement behaviors. And that really is the key to it. So just like subconscious thoughts, so maybe you're walking throughout your day just telling yourself things you don't even realize you're telling yourself, but when you bring awareness to it, to those thoughts, then now we can change them. The body is the same way. Until you bring awareness to how you move, how you function, and what's going on at the muscular level and at the brain and nervous system level, until you bring awareness to that, nothing will change. You'll continue down your quote unquote efficient path because that's what your brain is telling you to do. Just go back to the default. So until you give your brain the signal until you give your body the signal to change the way it's behaving and use your conscious awareness from the brain, nothing will change. And that's really the key of this, is using the brain, using the power of the nervous system to make those changes from the inside out, which is going to be through that mindful movement, through pandiculation, through a lot of techniques that allow that movement, rather than the outside in, which is going to be more of that stretching, which for many cases will not serve the purpose of decreasing the constant tension that you're experiencing. Another big contributor to why we experience chronic tension or muscular tension that never seems to release is due to stress. So stress plays a huge role in our nervous system. It creates a state of tension where our muscles tense, our fascia, which is also our connective tissue within our body, also changes its properties, becomes more taut, and also increases its tension. And we become, our bodies start going into this tightened position. So you can almost think about if somebody was attacking you and you were going into a protective mode, you would curl up almost into a ball and kind of almost like fetal position is what you would get into. And that's the same patterning of behavior that our muscles go into when we experience chronic stress. And stress can be from any kind of past trauma. It can be from cumulative micro traumas. It can be from stress at your job, stress at home, watching the news, anything that is increasing the negative energy within your body and causing a stress response, then can manifest physically in the way that it can create this tension. And that, if it's not dealt with, will become your new pattern of movement and behavior. And you can imagine if you get into this tightened position and you're always stressed and you're not addressing this, then you would have a lot of muscle imbalances. So a lot of times the muscles in the front of the body will become tightened and tense, and there can be imbalances all throughout the body that then can perpetuate more likelihood to be injured. There's a greater likelihood to become weakened, because if we're always in a tense position, our muscles cannot go through the full range of motion to actually cultivate strength. And there's also a huge fatigue problem to this, in that if you're always in a state of tension, that is a high caloric burning epicenter. So your amount of energy that you have to do other things throughout the day when you're always tense from stress will decrease. So overall, your energy levels will decline because of that as well. So I hope this serves you throughout your day and brings awareness to how you're moving. So the next time you go for a ride, notice where your shoulders are. Next time you're sitting at your desk, notice where your neck is. Notice what your posture is, where your shoulders are in that position as well. Maybe your low back, are you feeling tension? Where are you sitting on the chair? Just start to bring awareness to your body and how you're moving. And that really is the first step to figuring out how you can teach your body to relax when it needs to relax and how to tense when it needs to tense. If you found value in this, please share it with someone who will also find value. I would love to hear your feedback. Please leave a review. And if you haven't done so already, please hit the subscribe button and get the latest update on new episodes. And thank you again for taking your precious time to join me and to listen to this message. And I hope it serves you well as you go throughout your day.